I just think really it's important to really hone in on like people's passions and always encourage them to follow whatever they're into. When classrooms are structured in a collaborative manner, it lends itself more to these like, joyful learning opportunities.
Welcome Linwood Unified School District families to Season 2 of Beyond the Classroom podcast. I am your new host, Sarah Barnes, as Dr. Martinez has graciously passed her baton my way. And I just want to take a moment to thank Dr. Martinez for building this incredible platform and this community here. And it is an honor to carry this forward. I currently serve as a licensed clinical social worker supervisor with the Student Services Department, and I do hope to continue Dr. Martinez's vision of bringing information and knowledge your way that seeks to inspire, to motivate, and support your own personal daily growth. Today we are going to be discussing something near and dear to both of our hearts, which is going to highlight how can we return the fun and love and even joy for learning. But before we begin this discussion and this segment, I would like to introduce our guest speaker, Dr. David Morales, who currently serves as the principal, the administrator, if you will, for Will Rogers Elementary, and I believe he's been there for the past 7 years, right?
Yeah, 5 years.
Oh, 5 years. Okay.
Yeah, it feels like 7 years.
Feels like 7 years,
just
right.
kidding.
So if you can you just give us some of your background and your experiences, and maybe even highlight a little bit as to what first sparked your own personal love for learning?
That's a great question. And first of all, I just want to say thank you. This is a great opportunity. So I'm just very grateful for Student Services.
No, thank you.
No, absolutely. I started off in Linwood just basically straight out of college. It was literally, 20-some years ago where I literally answered a LA Times ad for a substitute teacher in Linwood. Started here in Linwood, started subbing, and then took a full-time position at Lindbergh Elementary, which is, always home to me. And, taught for many years, and then just had the opportunity to become an instructional lead at Hostler Middle School, which I learned so much. I loved the middle school setting. And then transitioned into an assistant principal at Cesar Chavez and also at Washington Elementary. And then just, been given the opportunity to be a principal at Will Rogers, and I've been there for the past 5 years.
Okay.
Yeah. And I'm a firm believer that elementary school, it should be, fun. And I think sometimes the word fun kind of has a negative connotation, and especially in school. And don't get me wrong, I do believe in, high standards, rigorous instruction, and really kind of elevating our students in terms of achievement. But I think the best way to get to that is to really create a fun, loving environment where our students, find joy in coming to school and to learning. I'm a firm believer that learning is inquisitively joyful, and I think my vision and my goal is for at Will Rogers and in general is that I believe elementary it's their childhood, and I think childhood is a really precious gift, and I want to ensure that our students enjoy their childhood. Mm-hmm. I want them to be in a safe, loving environment, and I really want them to succeed.
Right.
Yeah.
So for me, when I was a kid, I was that child. Like, I loved school. I never wanted to miss school. Yeah. In fact, when I was 13 years old, my mother, my brother, my sister, my grandparents, my aunt, they all went on a trip to Israel.
Oh, wow.
Right? And I was invited to go. And I chose not to go because I did not want to miss 2 weeks of school.
Oh my goodness, Miss Barnes.
So that I literally chose school over this huge family trip and opportunity, right? But I just loved learning. And as an adult, I used to joke around, like, if I could be a professional student and get paid for it, I would. And people would say, well, you could do that. You could become a researcher and things like that. But, life had other plans for me, and I am where I'm at today, and I'm fulfilled in what I am doing right now. But I do find that as adults, a lot of adults don't necessarily really seek out knowledge. They've lost their passion and love for learning. And that kind of segues into modeling that to your children, right? And if you don't love learning as a parent, then your children kind of tend to follow those patterns. So my question for you is, what do you think happens that adults end up losing their own reverence or respect or even joy for learning? What do you think happens to the adult that they begin to lose that sense of fun for learning?
I think that sometimes adults just have the negative experiences at their school, and I understand that. When I was a kid, I didn't have like the best experiences, but what I do remember is like the experiences that I did have with like my teachers playing kickball, or a book that I read that I really kind of fell in love with. And I think it's really just honing in on people's passions and what they're into and their experiences. I think sometimes we've kind of like pigeonholed, adults or children, and we put certain values of, okay, this is what's important. You have to do X, Y, and Z, and if not, then you're somehow less or somehow kind of marginalized. And I think it's really important just to kind of put value in any interest or learning, whether if it's like a student who wants to read, a comic book, that has just as much value as it does reading like, maybe not Shakespeare, but, maybe something along the lines of, a graphic novel or, I'm trying like Charlotte's Web. I just think really it's important to really hone in on like people's passions and always encourage them to follow whatever they're into.
Right.
I just think that's, such is life, and even as an adult, whether it's not even necessarily has to be like a book that you're reading or anything like that, but maybe listening to a podcast, case in point, or, possibly like just diving into knowledge, and I think it's just really important that we don't lose that. And
it can also be perspective, right? Like I think adults could lose a sense of fun for learning because of how they perceive what learning is. Sometimes they just think learning is only connected to the classroom or returning to the university room. But there's so many forms of learning. Like just as human beings, like classroom is always in session. Like we're never not learning.
Right.
Only we're not always aware. Right? That we're learning, right? So I think sometimes it's the perspective of not even realizing that everything you do from the moment you wake up till you go to bed at nighttime, we're constantly learning, but sometimes we're on autopilot that we're not aware that we're learning.
Yeah, no,
right?
absolutely.
And on another note, sometimes learning could, like you kind of highlighted it earlier, it might not be to that person's temperament or personality or their style. And everybody has different ways of learning. Yeah, right?
Absolutely.
And so how can we appeal to, well, I might learn visually, you might learn through listening, and they don't always know what the resources that are out there for their style of learning.
Absolutely.
Right? So when that is hindered, then the knowledge can basically not be sought out, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think too, just in that vein as well, it's like, I think it's just really important as us as educators to provide those like same opportunities for kids. As a child may have a difficult time expressing their knowledge or their mastery, of a particular lesson or standard. However, they may be able to, present it in a project and something along those lines. So I think honestly too, it's just really providing, the tools and opportunities for our students to showcase their talents and their skills, and that in turn creates this like happiness and joy in learning as well, and just in the school environment as well.
Right. What would that look like in the classroom? Like, can we bring some form of play into the classroom environment for learning opportunities?
Yeah, I think it probably lends itself more in terms of like maybe like collaboration, right? I'm a firm believer when I walk into classrooms, I want to see students engage. And one of the most important ways students are engaged is student voice. It's really important for me to like hear my students talk, for them to formulate their own ideas, and it's just, and also the importance of like listening as well. Right. I think when classrooms are structured in a collaborative manner, it lends itself more to these like joyful learning opportunities. And also too, I know that, I'm a firm believer in, celebrating birthdays, what I mean? Like having your parents bring cupcakes to school and, because those are the memories you're going to remember the most, right? And I think when like families feel comfortable to bring like, Johnny a cake and everyone sings happy birthday to him or her, it just creates more of a family atmosphere, and I just think it's vital for
Right.
especially for elementary.
Right.
Yeah.
And I kind of want to go back a little bit to what you're talking about, play and like the recess time or even like nutrition time. Sometimes, for example, if a kid might disrupt the classroom, there might be a punitive response from a teacher where a child might have to miss recess or that play time. And I don't know if like all the teachers are aware that sometimes that could actually sabotage the classroom setting after the fact in recess, like where that bad behavior can continue. And here's why. And I'll just give you an example. Like children that may have some form of like developmental delays, or children that might have been diagnosed with like attention deficit disorders. Well, if they're disrupting the classroom and then they are told like, okay, now you're going to be on timeout, you can't go play. We're not helping the mechanisms of their brain. So for example, like if a child's like, okay, you can't play for 20 minutes, you're going to skip your recess. Well, what's happening is like the frontal cortex, like the frontal part of the brain that is responsible for like judgment and insight and just like the behavior component and making those choices and decisions. When you're preventing the play, then you're helping that part of the brain stay dormant. So when you tell a kid go play, that part of the brain begins to fire up. That actually helps that kid concentrate better and focus in classroom.
100%.
Right? And so, I mean, there's so much power in playtime. Conflict resolution, building social skills, helping children improve like their peer orientation and getting along with other students, right? And just internal like regulation for the child that feels overstimulated, or maybe they're overstressed out in their bodies. You know, their nervous central system is just out of control. So there's so much power in play. Even like if they did math, for example, okay, we're going to do bingo, right? Or like musical chairs for, I don't know, a science topic. All of these go such a long way with developing so many parts
100%.
of the student.
Yeah.
So I'm just kind of curious as to how can we help teachers and even parents, so in two different environments, right? Teachers have a lot of demands on them. So how can we, so I have a two-part question for you. How can we support teachers who have a lot of demands with curriculum, simultaneously create and maintain an environment of creativity and fun and play? And then also the second question to that is how can we help support parents foster that sense of love for learning through play at home? I know you're a father.
I am.
You've been a teacher. So you have like experiences from both components. So I'm just kind of curious, what advice would you give to a teacher and also a parent?
You know, I think there's like this misunderstanding, and I know, like, you know, being an administrator for like, what has it been, 8 years? I know, for a while now. You know, sometimes I'll walk into a classroom and then the teacher just feels like they need to explain, well, we were doing this project and I know they're a little noisy. I'm like, no, I love that. I loved, you know, like, I hate saying this, but quote unquote, like controlled chaos. Because I want to see kids up. I want to see kids talking. I want to see kids being able to feel free, you know, to really engage into the content. I think that's just really important. So as I would say, I think it kind of falls onto the culture the administrator creates. If you are expecting, you know, students to, you know, have this rigid environment, you know, and I kind of look back in my own childhood where, you know, it was like 40 kids and we were all in rows and, you know, it was yes, please, no, thank you, which I'm so firm.
You're like, there's still merit to that.
Yeah, no, for sure. It was funny because I was telling this story. I actually met with some of my old grade school friends and we were talking, and it was like, I remember being in school and then the principal would walk in and everyone would have to stand up, good morning, you know, Sister Joanne, you know, and sit back down. And it was, you know, there's certain reverence I still think is really important. No, but I honestly think it's the environment in which you create. One of the things I was really kind of proud of, you know, our school is that in the morning, and I think the story kind of answers your question to a certain extent, is, you know, sometimes we look at, you know, schools and, you know, kids are lined up, you know, from 8 to 8:45 and they have to be in these lines and stuff like that. And, you know, it's interesting because I feel like it's more work to watch them be in lines than it is if they just had free play. So we just kind of allowed kids, you know, when the supervision is, you know, we have all the resources available, they're playing. And the beauty of it too is that we'll see kids from like first grade playing with some third graders and vice versa, and most of the older kids, they're older kids, they're like in your groups and stuff like that, and kids are playing soccer. But I think it just kind of creates this, like, they start off the day like that. So if they're kind of playing, they're getting their their exercise, blood flowing, and I don't know the science to it, but what I do know is that there's a lot of smiley faces on our campus.
So mobility is key,
yeah,
right?
and it's just like what they would say, like when you exercise, it's like that endorphin rush, and that you feel it. And so I think our kids kind of start the day off like that, and I hope that it would just kind of continue in a classroom environment. But I think just kind of creating a culture of collaboration, project-based learning. And not that rigidness, so to speak, but just more of a collaborative type setting. And I think also the onus kind of goes to the administrator, because it's the culture that you kind of create inherently by the observation or the feedback that you do give teachers. If I'm walking to a teacher and see a lot of kids like in grouping, it's like, I love the way you utilize student voice. I love how the students were collaborating. I love your setting. And so what you praise is what you kind of, see. And I think it's kind of goes into like the culture of the school.
I agree with that. So leadership is key, right, at the school. Like, your teachers will follow your lead, and your lead involves, I'm observing, I'm acknowledging, I'm affirming, I'm giving feedback, but you're also living it yourself and how you interact, like with the student as well, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
I remember I had to do like a student observation one time, and I was going to this, I believe it was like a third grade class, like for 2 weeks in a row, because this child was exhibiting like a resistance, if you will, to going to class, and he didn't want to go to school, so I was asked to go support the student. But when I was there, I began to realize, if I was this student, I wouldn't want to be here either. Yeah. And it wasn't that the instruction was negative, but what had lacked for me in my 2-week observation was the personal relationship and connection between teacher to student, right? There wasn't a lot of animation, there wasn't a lot of warmth, and we don't know what any of these students go through at home.
That's
right?
the thing. No, absolutely.
And so that's part of, I think, instilling love of learning and the fun of learning in our students is, as a teacher, how do I set the tone in my atmosphere, and how do I make my students feel every day that they're walking into my room? Am I animated? Am I excited to see them? Do I show them that I value them? That I want you here, right? Or is my face like flat? Is my face not showing any type of excitement to see them? Is my eye contact? Because kids are sponges. They pick up on body language so much more than the adult does. And that's because they're more in tune with emotions, but they can't always express themselves verbally, but yet their body knows, right? Yeah. And so I think it's key. But now that I'm reflecting on it, it was also a result of leadership. So the leadership wasn't very animated, wasn't very engaging. So then you could see that in some of the teachers, right? 100%. It trickled down.
Yeah, no, it trickled.
And so that leadership component, it's huge. And it's the same thing in the home, the leaders of the home. Yeah. So getting back to the second part of the question, how do we help the parents elicit that same type of fun in the child, in the home life for learning?
That's a great question too. I know we've been having conversations about like the role of homework, right? And I think there's still that kind of misnomer where you have like the the heavy packet and Mondays, all that. No, but it is kind of I guess old school way of approach. But the research is pretty clear. The most beneficial thing you can do for your child at home is not working on a worksheet, but it's having dinner as a family. Playing a sport, going to the library, and if you're into reptiles, like, let's go find books about reptiles. It's really kind of what we previously talked about is kind of fostering like your passion and your love. I was very fortunate. I was thinking about my mom a lot, and I think the older I get, the more I appreciate her. But she took us to the library every week, and I was just I was into like bobcats, and so she would take me to learn about bobcats, right? And so I just feel like it was really it's important just to have that home environment where, you know, that you just as best as you can is just foster love. And it doesn't have to be like, you know, it doesn't have to be, you know, dependent on economic status.
Right.
A walk, you know, in your neighborhood, a conversation of like, you know, tell me, like, what do you think about X, Y, and Z? You know, and I think we sometimes, and I can only speak for myself, like, you know, maybe at times we shortchange our kids and not validate like their ideas and their, you know, their viewpoint on the world, you know. But I would definitely just, you know, it's not sitting down and, you know, doing your packet and, you know, this and that. The most beneficial thing, like based on research, is like reading for 20 minutes, you know, playing a sport, and, you know, conversing, eating together as a family. That is the most beneficial thing you can do for a child. And it really is, it's developing the whole child, because I'm a firm believer, once we address the whole child, learning will be a byproduct of that. So, you know, and just enjoy you know, because kids grow up really fast. I remember my daughter's 16, so I have a teenage daughter, so, you know, she'll
You
feel
have your
stressed
own
at
struggles
work, you know
right
what
there.
that is, right? You know, for sure. But as best I could, and, you know, there's no perfect person, you know what I mean? Like, I look back and I'm like, maybe I should have done that. But, you know, I just, you know, I really tried to, like, just as best, like, I know she was into, like, anime, so, like, let's get anime books, you know, things like that. So, you know, it just talk to your child. You know, it's probably the most beneficial thing to child development.
Yeah. And it's not even like talking at them, it's talking with them,
Yeah,
right?
yes.
It's creating a conversation with your child that shows genuine interest for whatever they have experienced throughout their day.
Yeah.
How's your day? Tell me about your day. What was like we call them like open-ended, closed-ended questions, but a lot of us parents like, did you have a good day? And the child's like, yes.
Right, and then that's it. Like,
Did you do anything fun? No.
Yeah.
But when we learn as parents how to ask those open-ended questions, tell me one thing that you did that was fun today.
Yeah.
And then it could turn into like a conversation. Like, we're literally showing interest.
Yeah.
And I like what you said, because you were kind of highlighting, I'm going to rephrase it in my own wording though, when we are addressing the whole child, physically, emotionally, mentally, even spiritually, then the child's brain has enough space, because it's been decluttered from all of the stressors, right? Now they have enough like space to enjoy life, to enjoy learning, and to like add to their knowledge, right? But
100%.
an overwhelmed child that is with a rigid, and this is what Dr. Martinez and I have talked about, like the number one sign of mental wellness is flexibility, right?
Yes.
So when we are rigid in the classroom, rigid at home, we really suffocate our children's love and joy for learning. But I kind of want to segue away from that really quickly and talk about, a lot of our children can be hard on themselves when failure happens or when mistakes happen, whether that's on their homework, on their tests, they get poor grades, or they're not satisfied with their grades. I'm just kind of curious, because all of our children will be adults one day.
Yes.
So how can failure, or we could reframe that as personal mistakes, how can that actually support our students in having a sense of fun for learning? Because our children could be like, oh, I suck, like I'm never going to amount to anything, I'm not good at anything because I failed at something or I made a mistake. So how can we reframe that for kids? Like, wait, this mistake could actually teach you a lot to where you could still enjoy learning.
Right.
I'm just wondering, how can we reframe that for the children?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I don't know if I have like the perfect answer for that. I think what I would imagine is, I think it's important to build resiliency, and I want to agree with you 1,000% in terms of, you know, mental health and flexibility, and the ability to pivot, and the ability to see the bigger picture. You know, sometimes I think we unintentionally create like these environments where they're very fixated, and kind of the previous conversation we were having about, like, if you're not X, Y, and Z, then it's somehow less value. You know, students do come into my office, you know, if they made a poor choice or what have you, and, you know, the one thing I always like tell them, you know, like, you are going to make mistakes. That is part of life. I make mistakes. But but the most important thing is that you kind of learn from them. And then to me, I put an emphasis on it's not the idea of a right or wrong or a mistake, but it's the mere fact that you jumped off the high dive. You took that shot. You attempted to, and if the outcome wasn't what you thought it was, or if it wasn't the outcome that if it wasn't the outcome, then maybe that's kind of like not the point.
Right.
The point is always to try, put yourself out there, especially in terms of like in the classroom is, I feel like the teachers do an amazing job, and I think part of that job is kind of facilitating their learning, where you are kind of guiding them, to knowledge, not necessarily being the gatekeeper of it.
Right.
Yeah.
No, I love it. I know for my son, when he makes a mistake, because he even has like a coach for baseball, and the coach even recently told him, like, man, you're really hard on yourself, aren't you? Right? But life is already hard. You don't have to be harder on yourself.
For sure.
And I tell my son, like, actually, mistakes are beautiful.
Yeah.
Failure is beautiful. If you stay in the place of failure, then you have failed, right? Mm-hmm. There's that old saying, you plan to fail, you fail to plan, mm-hmm. or you fail to plan, you plan to fail. Sorry, yeah. It's that saying, right? And I tell my son, like, we would not have electricity today if mistakes were not made.
Right.
We would not have the light bulb today if mistakes were not made.
Yeah.
Success follows mistakes and failure. We have to learn. And we don't always learn by the information we receive. Mm-hmm. We're learning by the mistakes.
Experience, right?
The experience.
Yeah, and again, it goes back to mistakes are just part of life. I mean, we all make mistakes. We all, have the opportunity to remedy those mistakes, mm-hmm. To reflect on those mistakes. And I don't even look at mistakes in terms of like academics. I think the role of the teacher is more the facilitation process, not necessarily the gatekeeper of knowledge. Like, how are we guiding our students to reach that knowledge? So high academic, achievement mm-hmm. is more of a facilitation and more of a guiding. I think sometimes there is like that old school, approach where I think it's very detrimental to a child is like the gatekeeper. You know what I mean? Like, no, you know what I mean? Like, yeah. I had those teachers, and let me tell you, I did not like them. I think it's really that, like, we are not gatekeepers of knowledge, and I think if you have that perspective, you're just going to create a lot of unhappiness in a child.
I agree.
Yeah.
So what would you say, how would the classroom and even the home, like what would those settings both look like if children were able to say, hey, like fun is learning? What would both of those settings begin to even look like?
They'd be loud, you know what I mean? Like, for sure. But in a good way, you know what I mean? Like I
used to always say like a messy home is a
happy home, right? And I'm a firm believer of that. Like, wherever your space for your child, if it has like papers and drawings and, paint or whatever that may look like, I think that's always a sign of, an engaged, happy child. Mm-hmm. And same thing with the classroom. I love going to classrooms and seeing kids like get up with their papers and they're writing things down, and there's just like that natural excitement. And when the kids feel comfortable and they feel free to kind of like be themselves, that's when the best learning happens. I feel like true learning only happens in those environments. Mm-hmm. I think, again, if you have the, sit down in rows and you are going to answer X, Y, and Z, and you repeat X, Y, and Z, and all that stuff. I mean, I'm sure kids will still learn that way, but they're not going to remember that learning,
Right,
and
right.
I think that's kind of like our job in education.
All right. Well, as we wrap up,
okay.
I would like to leave our listeners with a take-home challenge.
Okay.
Right?
I'm a little nervous.
So my question for you is, what is one thing you could suggest to our families and even teachers? What is one thing they could do this week? One small thing that they could implement this week that would support the improvement in the area of like, I really want to experience fun in my learning. What is one thing that you would suggest for them to do this week?
Honestly, I think it's as simple as sitting down together as a family, talking, what are your interests,
So connect with each other.
I think that's the essence. That's like the zeros and ones of it all. Like, is that connection, that relationship, that conversation that happens to it. One of the things too, I really love seeing kids that are like engaging into like the physical world. I love seeing kids digging and finding bugs and, all those types of things, just allow our kids to get dirty a little bit. You know what I mean? Like,
allow them to be
like little
children.
Children, right? And, they have their whole life to be adults, and, time is precious, and just kind of relish and enjoy, where they're at in their lives and the innocence of a child, and, just really, provide an opportunity and environment that they feel loved and welcomed and all that good stuff.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Morales, for your time. We appreciate it. Your time is invaluable. So thank you so much
I appreciate it. Thank you.
Sharing your wisdom and your knowledge with us today.
Oh, I don't know about wisdom.
Thank you.
I'll just say experience, but thank you.
Thank you. We appreciate you.
Oh, thank you so much.
All right, families, thank you for tuning in today. We look forward to you returning again for our next Beyond the Classroom podcast with Dr. Marquez, who will be discussing universal design learning. Thank you and have a great day.
Bye. Thank you.